Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going further through this transmission. I tore it apart and my plan was to see if I could fix this gear. This is what runs a speedometer. That's the shaft gear, and then this is the driven gear that goes out, and your speedometer cable goes in the end of it right there. You can kind of see a little, if you can see it, a square in the end of that. It's not very good. So anyway, when I got this car, it had automatic transmission. I put the 4-speed in it. I hooked everything up, and my speedometer worked for a little bit, but it was off. And so I ordered another gear, this purple gear, which is a 17 tooth, which is about the smallest gear you can go with. And according to the book, this gear that's on this shaft should work for this one all the way up to, I think, a 22 tooth gear. And so I didn't think it'd be a problem. Well, I put it in and it just worked for a little bit, and then it started bouncing and it quit working completely. And I thought, well, it's not meshing deep enough into the gear maybe. So I made an offset bullet, what I call a bullet. I machined one of these and I offset the hole in it. You can't tell it just looking at it, but this outside is offset. You can kind of look at the taper area, how it goes back and forth up here. It's offset a 1/16 of an inch. So what I thought I could do is put it in there and slowly turn it till the gear engaged all the way and I'd be fine. Well, that's what I did. And it kind of tried to work a little bit and then it didn't. And I just gave up on it. I bought a box from Jegs. It's a GPS speedometer drive. So you can keep your original speedometer and yet have the luxury of GPS accuracy. And it works really great other than starting off from stop and you start to go, you have to get up to about 20 miles an hour for that to start spinning the speedometer. And it kind of jumps and jumps up to 20 and the needle bounces back and forth a little bit and then it starts reading, and it reads really accurately after that. But for some reason, it just won't start off from zero. And I know my speedometer's not in a bind. I've made sure of that. It's got a brand new cable, brand new speedometer. It should be working fine, so I don't know, maybe I need to double check my voltage on that, make sure I'm getting a full 12 volts to it, because if you watch my video when I installed that, I had a little hiccup with the voltage. So anyway, I would like to go back to drive it off of here. I think it would be a lot more consistent throughout all the mile per hour, and it'd be back to original again. So a couple of things I discovered on this when I was looking into it to this point. First off, this gear was back towards the back of the transmission by about 1/4 of an inch more than it should have been. So it was just barely catching this plastic gear basically like this, you know. So, let me see if I can get that where it should have been riding right here in the center like that. It was clear on one end. So I think it was just barely catching it and making it slip until it finally wore, because it was only catching part of the teeth. If you look at it from this way, you can kind of see how the end towards that short end, how much taller it is than the end right here. Get it a little closer and see. You can kind of see how the teeth are worn down on that. So it finally quit working altogether. So one thing I found out, not only was this offset the wrong way, but this gear measures 1.770 OD. The gear that's supposed to be on here is supposed to measure 1.840. Okay, so we're about 70 thousandths smaller than what it should be. So I think between the fact that this was offset, plus it's too small, is the issue I'm having with this. It wasn't loose on the shaft. I drove it down to where it needs to be before I realized it's the wrong gear. This is a 7-tooth gear, and it should be a 7-tooth 1.840 OD. So I've ordered the correct gear for this. It should be in hopefully in the next few days. And my goal is, and I ordered a new 17-tooth gear. When I bought this gear, I bought a whole kit of these that came with, I think they go all the way up to 22 teeth. This is the gear that was actually in the transmission when I got it in the 4-speed, and that's a 19 tooth. And as near as I could tell at that time, I needed to go up about I had to increase the mile per hour on the speedometer by about 7 miles per hour. It was about 7 miles per hour slow. So, or decrease it. Increase it, because the less teeth you have, the faster this is going to spin. So the faster it's going to spin the speedometer. The more teeth you have, the slower it's going to spin because it's taking longer to go around. So I needed to speed up about 7 miles an hour, and it's my understanding that for every tooth you reduce this, you gain about 3 miles per hour. So I was hoping that'd get me within a mile per hour correct. My only concern now is because that gear wasn't correct to begin with, that maybe this gear, I wasn't getting the true mile per hour out of this gear that I should have been. So I'll look at it and see what I need to do there when I get to that point. But my goal is to end up with my speedometer hooked back to the transmission and not use that box anymore. Okay, so that was the first thing I discovered. And then once I got into the transmission, I was pleasantly surprised of how good a shape this transmission is. My car is a 1971. I bought this transmission from Corvette Generation down in Dade City, Florida. They are the really, if you need anything for your C3 Corvettes and C4 Corvettes, they've probably got the part there. They've got over 350 cars that they are taking parts off of. And plus, they're also a dealer for some companies. You can buy the new parts from them too. But after checking the numbers on this case, I discovered this transmission is out of a 1965 Corvette. And it's still a Muncie 4-speed. It's not that big a deal. Some of the little differences are, like the input shaft here. This is a 10 spline, 1.125" diameter shaft for the input. That's where the clutch rides. And on the transmission, to be correct for my car, I believe that's supposed to be like a 32 spline. I'm not 100% sure. I know it's a lot finer spline, but I'm not sure exactly. Again, it doesn't really hurt anything. The transmission works great. I didn't have any problems with it. It looks really good on the inside. All the the synchronizers all look good. They're not all wore off or anything. All the bearings feel good. All the gears look good. There's no chips or anything in them. But I did run into a few issues. And I'm glad I'm doing this now, because I think it would have caused me problems down the road and I would have been pulling out again anyway. So I'm hoping now that I've got all apart and I can go through and fix everything that I can see is definitely wrong with it now. Hopefully I'll have a trouble-free transmission for a long time. One of the first things I noticed, well, the reason, to get back to the reason I pulled it out along with the motor is it had several little leaks, and some of them were like on the shifter fork case here. You can see those little seals right down in there. Those were leaking, and it wasn't bad. I mean, it was just the lever would get wet. I mean, I don't even know if it ever made drips on the garage floor or not, but it just bugged me. And then there was a couple other leaks where it did drip between the cases and stuff. So I thought, well, I got the engine out. I might as well take the transmission apart, put all new gaskets and seals in it, and have a nice sealed up transmission. Plus, I also wanted to check and see what was wrong with this part here. So as I started taking the transmission apart, I found some little things that are a little bit of a concern, and some of them were a big concern. When I was taking, these shifter rods go in here, and then these forks go in the shifter rod right there like that. They slip on that shaft. And I pulled the first shifter rod out, or shifter fork, and it looks pretty good. I mean, it's got a little bit of wear on the faces there, you can see. I don't know if it's really enough to worry about. If that's all it was, I probably wouldn't have done anything with them. I probably would have just cleaned them up and put them back in the car. But I took the second shifter fork out, and you can see those cracks in that face, okay? I don't know, I mean, I'm not a transmission guy. I don't know what problems that could cause down the road. To me, anytime you have a crack in something that's not supposed to be cracked, that's not good. So I decided to order new forks. And so I've got those coming in, but I'm glad I caught that. I don't know, it might have ran for another 100 years, I don't know, but to me it looks like something's going on there that's not normal. Okay, so I got those ordered. The next thing I found was on the tail shaft. I've already pressed the new bearing in here. You can see how nice and shiny and bronze colored that is. Okay, this is the one I took out. And you can see there's not a speck of bronze left in there. It's actually got a little bit of gold in it from the shaft running on it, it looks like. So it was to the point of being bad, very bad. And it measures about 25 thousandths oversized in here from what it should. And I was having trouble with, this is my new seal I got to put in here, but I was having trouble with it leaking past this seal. And I think it's because my yoke was so, you know, the slide yoke for the drive shaft goes down through there. And I think it was so loose on that bearing that it would push it off center and let oil come around that seal. The other thing I found, and you have to forgive my yoke here, this was about 20 thousandths undersized here where it ran in that bearing. So I thought, well, no big deal, I'll weld it up. And anytime you weld on something, you cause shrinkage. And so what I was trying to do, that's my welds look so crappy, I would put a little spot like in 4 places around it, let it cool down, not get any heat in it, try to keep from shrinking this. Well, I was doing pretty good, but by the time I got just these 2 rings put on there, it won't go on the shaft anymore. And so I'm sure by the time I finished welding all this up in here that I would have had to gone in and rebroach the teeth in this spline to get it to fit on the shaft. And it can be done. It's just, for the equipment I have, it's a lot of work. I mean, it would probably take me a couple days to repair this once I got it welded up. And I can buy a new one for $100. I'm not going to screw with it. I mean, in theory, this one could still be saved. I could finish welding it up and machine it down and then go in there and recut these splines so that they'll fit on the shaft again. And I might try doing that, just make a video on it, show you how much work it is. But I decided not to do that. So that was a couple more things I'm glad I found while I was working on this. The other really thing that kind of scared me was on the throwout bearing. This arm was new, the throwout bearing is brand new. I put 2,500 miles on this car with this transmission in it. I pulled it out, and I pulled the throwout bearing out, and I noticed on the face there, this is what it's supposed to look like. See how nice and shiny and flat that face is all the way across? If you look at this bearing, you can see the shiny part here towards the center, but this outer kind of goldish colored looking, bronzish colored looking ring around there, that's where the fingers of the pressure plate hit. And they only hit here, they don't hit all the way across. That's why it's not worn in the center. But it's actually, I took and put an indicator on that, and that's actually worn down about 4 thousandths, which really doesn't sound like a lot in the overall schemes of things. But for me, in 2,500 miles, it wore down 4 thousandths. That's not good as far as I'm concerned. And then also I noticed on the back, you can see where the fork was actually digging into this back ring right here on the bearing, and pretty bad considering that's only 2,500 miles. To me, that looks like it's worn in there probably a good 10 thousandths or better. And same way on the other side, it's not quite as bad, but it's still worn. And I'm looking at how it's crushing that metal out right here at the top, right there next to my finger, and it's pushing that ring forward. I think in probably 5,000 miles, that bearing would have been worn clear through and rubbing on the actual bearing part and locking it up. It would have been junk. I've been pulling the transmission out to replace that. So again, I'm glad I'm doing this now. And I couldn't figure out why I would be doing that. And I kept racking my brain, and I was laying in bed one night, and I thought about the fork, the throwout bearing fork, and how it works. On this transmission, when it's in the transmission, it's in the transmission, it goes against a ball right here. This thing right here has got a ball down in there, and it latches onto that ball. And when it's in place, this fork is, you can see it's pretty close to the bell housing down here where it hooks to the clutch linkage, this part right here. It sits about like that. And so this fork, the area where the bearing fit in there, and it's kind of hard to see, but it's sitting pretty much parallel with what would be the clutch surface when it's in there right now, before you go to push in on the clutch. So when you go to push in on the clutch, sorry for the noise, when you go to push in on the clutch, this bearing was hooked on here like this, okay? And so when you go to push in on the clutch, and I don't know how well this can look on the camera, but as you tip it, you can see it's tipping the whole bearing. So when it's hitting the fingers, it's just hitting on one side here, and the way the fork was, it held that bearing that way no matter what. It couldn't, you know, a lot of them you see where it'll pivot on there like that, and it'll level itself up with those fingers and go straight in against them. Well, this fork, the way it was made, wouldn't let it do that. It kept it tipped like that, so it was always putting a lot of pressure against one side sideways like that, and forcing it and binding it up. And what I found out, if you look at the face right here, where that throwout bearing sits, this inner edge right here was rounded already right there. That was formed that way. But this outer edge here went straight across, flat, and it had a real sharp edge here on the end. So basically that bearing, when it was on there, it couldn't pivot. So I hope I'm doing the right thing. I try to get this on something white where you can see. I sanded this leading edge, so I've got a nice radius all the way across this surface now. So no matter where that tips, you know, as it goes in and out, it's going to allow that bearing to stay straight with those fingers and engage straight and not have pressure cocking them sideways. So I'm really hoping that takes care of my problem, and we will see down the road, I guess. The other thing I had, this is the they call it the bearing retainer. It actually retains the front bearing and the transmission, but the throwout bearing also rides back and forth on it. Okay, and you can see that's pretty loose on there, and I've got about 20 thousandths wear on this surface. And again, it's one of those things that would have been easier to weld up and remachine, because you just bore it out rather than have to cut splines. But this is cast iron, so you got to be a little careful welding them. You could crack it, and eventually this little snout would just snap off. So I could buy a new one. So that's what I did. So I've got a new bearing, and you can see that fits a lot better on there. New bearing, new retainer, so that should be good. Hey everyone, if you're still watching, I appreciate it, and I want to apologize for where this video ended. I thought I could get all this information on one video, and after putting it all together, I realized it was just way too long. So I decided to break it here and then show the rest of a video next week. So I apologize for that, but I guarantee you would have been bored to death if you would have watched this whole video. It's just too much information in one sitting. So anyway, I thank you guys for watching, and we're real close to 1,000 subscribers, so I'm really excited about that. And I thank everybody that has subscribed, and if anybody watches our channel and likes it, please subscribe, hit the like button. And like I always say, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next video.